Welcome to Part 5 of Stanwick of Scotland Yard. Visit brooksaudioBooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 13. The Transport of Supplies. Inspector Stanwick continued his walk along the embankment until he arrived at the yard. There, after a meeting with his superior, he received a cheque for £10 and went to the nearest bank, requesting the funds in half-crowns. With his pockets weighed down by the silver, he made his way to the panopticon and asked to see the manager. Following their conversation, he was directed to a waiting room, where he was soon joined by Molly Moran. "You're here early, Mr. Stanwick," she greeted him. "Yes, I need to get my hands on some of those coins. Here's £10 worth of half-crowns. Please count out 80 of Mr. Welland." "But there's nothing special about them. They're just regular half-crowns. I showed some to a friend of mine at the bank, and he said the same." "Oh," said Stanwick, "so a bank clerk has seen them. But weren't you worried about telling him?" "I didn't mention anything. I thought maybe they weren't real, like perhaps Mr. Welland's associates were making them. Counterfeit coining, isn't that what you call it? So I showed my friend 4 coins, saying they'd been rejected because they weren't genuine. He assured me they were perfectly fine." "Oh," Stanwick repeated, now more skeptical. "I'll take the 80 anyway. May I see that bag now that we won't be interrupted?" It was exactly as Miss Moran had described. A simple yet sizable vanity bag with a central compartment that looked normal, flanked by 2 side pockets, each capable of holding about 150 half-crowns, and lined with an inner pouch that could be removed with the coins. When the side compartments were closed with their spring latches, they were hidden from casual observation, although if the bag were handled, their presence became clear. Stanwick wasn't surprised to find out that Welland had given strict orders that the bag was to be carried looped around the girl's arm and never taken off except when she was actually working at the paybox. However, his interest in the bag was minimal compared to the curiosity he felt about the coins Miss Moran had received from Welland. There were 130 of them, and he spilled them out onto a table, starting to pick through them. At first glance, he noted something that deepened the sense of unease that the girl's story about the bank clerk had stirred within him. It was clear these coins were not new. They had clearly been in circulation. The dates varied, and generally speaking, the wear on each coin matched its age. Welland's tale seemed unlikely even at best, but now he had solid evidence against it. These coins hadn't been pulled from circulation due to age or wear. They were still perfectly valid. Stanwick cursed under his breath as the implications began to settle in. If these coins had different dates and had been circulating, they couldn't be forgeries. Creating dies was costly and complicated. It was hard to believe anyone had managed to produce a series with assorted dates. Plus, once the counterfeiters had inserted the fakes into circulation, they would have stopped trying to push them out. He returned his attention to the coins, inspecting them more closely. The longer he examined them, the more convinced he became of their authenticity. The design revealed by his lens was immaculate. The color, texture, and weight felt just right, and every coin he tested produced a satisfying ring. He intended to have the experts at the mint look at them, but he was confident his own assessment would hold true. If that turned out to be the case, it suggested these coins had been stolen, but he couldn't fathom where they might have come from. It was simply ludicrous to think they had been taken from the mint. Coins of this age, and in such condition, simply wouldn't be present. It also seemed improbable that a bank had been robbed. Such a task would be incredibly challenging, and if it were possible, it was hard to understand why only half-crowns had been taken. The only explanation Stanwick could come up with was that some odd miser had spent his life hoarding these coins. But if that were the case, and Welland had stolen them, why wouldn't he just use them himself? However, after some more thought, a potential explanation surfaced. One undeniable aspect of the situation was that it was being executed on a massive scale. If Miss Moran exchanged 800 half-crowns each week, one could assume that the other girls did the same. That meant about 3,000 half-crowns weekly, amounting to 150,000 a year, nearly £19,000 worth. No single person could manage that alone. Without some sort of organization like the one he was witnessing, it would be impossible. Then it struck Stanwick that he had overlooked an important detail. This reasoning didn't resolve his question. For every half-crown Welland handed to the girls, he took one in exchange. How did he dispose of those? How did he possibly get rid of them? He simply couldn't do it. He'd been watched too closely. Stanwick couldn't believe he could have passed even small items like packages of snow. How could he possibly manage bulkier bags of half-crowns? Once again, Stanwick muttered a curse, this time almost aloud. "Excuse me, Mr. Stanwick." His thoughts were interrupted by the girl, who he had forgotten in his reverie. "Just a little habit of mine," he replied, a spark returning to his eyes. "That's all I need. I'll take 80 of Welland's half-crowns and give you 80 of mine in exchange. Then you can continue as usual." "Very well, Mr. Stanwick." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I wish you would share a bit about it." "I don't expect you can, but I'm really curious," she said. Stanwick looked at her thoughtfully, and then smiled. "I only wish I could help," he replied with a friendly tone. "If I had the answers to your questions, I'd be a much happier man, but I'll find out soon enough, and I promise to share what I learn. In any case, it's probably best for your own safety that you don't know too much." Then an idea struck him, and he continued, "May I ask, do you explore much of London?" "Me? No, Mr. Stanwick. What do you mean?" "I mean, I would think a young lady in your position might enjoy taking walks, especially on a free afternoon. Don't you wander through the streets?" "Oh, I get it. Well, yes, I do a bit, but I'm not much of a walker." "Then I recommend you steer clear of Waterloo Station and Harrow." She looked intrigued. "I'll elaborate," Stanwick continued. "Mr. Welland lives in Harrow and parks his car in Tate's Lane off York Road. York Road is quite near Waterloo. If he spotted you near either location, he might think you were watching him, so it's best to avoid those areas." As Stanwick made his way back to the yard, he found himself deep in thought. It had been rare for him to encounter such a clear-cut issue. Welland was bringing in hundreds of half-crowns every day. He must have a way of disposing of them or storing them somewhere. How or where was the question. The idea that the solution eluded him was increasingly frustrating. In a bit of a daze, he took the 80 half-crowns to the mint. He explained his situation to a senior official, which prompted immediate investigations and tests. After a long wait, he finally received the information he sought. All the half-crowns were authentic. No coins had been recalled from the mint. There were no hidden cellars where such coins might be hoarded, and no half-crowns had been reported stolen. This, of course, confirmed that Welland's story to Marley was false, which was a relief in some ways. However, it made the entire operation of the gang even more confusing. If they weren't getting rid of counterfeit coins, then what on earth were they doing? Stanwick's mind spun as he grappled with the issue. He walked slowly back to the yard, filled with confusion and simmering anger. These people were simply exchanging one set of perfectly good half-crowns for another. Despite the large sums involved, they weren't bringing in any half-crowns from the outside, nor were they getting rid of any. At least, they certainly weren't obtaining or distributing anything close to the number the girls had passed around. What was it all for? A sudden blaring of a motor horn and frantic shouts from bystanders jolted Stanwick back to reality. He nearly jumped out from in front of a heavily loaded bus, just in time. For a good 100 yards, he forgot about Welland and the half-crowns as he reflected on how unwise it was to daydream in the streets of London. Then his thoughts began to turn back to the mystery at hand. Whether it was the shock he had just experienced, or just his mind working normally, he suddenly considered a new angle. What if all these seemingly conflicting ideas were actually true? What if Welland wasn't acquiring half-crowns, or getting rid of them at all? What if he was simply trading one set of good ones for another? What if the half-crowns he got from the girls one day were handed back to them the next? Could this elaborate scheme be a cover for something much more sinister? Had Marley Moran lied, and was the gang actually dealing drugs after all? Admittedly, Stanwick struggled to see how such a plan would actually help in distributing cocaine or heroin, but this seemed a smaller issue compared to the greater confusion. Whatever was happening, it was clear there was more to this than just half-crowns. But no matter how long he pondered it, he found no clarity. Every idea that came to him felt more far-fetched than the last. In frustration, he returned to the notion that disposing of the half-crowns was key. What if a stash of half-crowns had been stolen, some of which were known to be marked? It seemed unlikely, but at least this idea fit with the facts. To explore this further, he decided to try a technique that had often helped him out of tight spots before. When he followed a trail of footsteps and encountered hard ground where the prints were invisible, he would make a mental note and proceed to the next soft patch, hoping to pick up the trail again. Now, he made a mental note of his own. If Welland was offloading these coins exchanged by the girls, and ignoring how he was doing it, where would the coins ultimately end up? After much thought, he concluded that the only logical plan for the man would be to deposit them at a bank. This at least provided a clear lead to follow. Feeling a sense of relief at the prospect of action, he drafted a letter to the managers of various banks in London. He was eager to find a man who, he suspected, was depositing large quantities of half-crowns. He would appreciate it if the manager could inquire whether such transactions were occurring at his bank, and if so, provide him with some details. The rest of that day, the inquiry stalled, but the next morning, Stanwick received a phone call. The manager of the Knightsbridge branch of the London and County Bank had some information that might help the inspector and invited him to come by. Half an hour later, Stanwick was seated in the manager's private office. "I don't know," said Mr. Elwood. "I'm not sure if I've led you on a wild goose chase, but for nearly a year there's been a man depositing around 400 to 600 half-crowns every Wednesday afternoon. While it's not unusual to receive weekly payments in silver, it's quite rare for it to be exclusively one type of coin. When I saw your circular, I thought this might be the person you're looking for." "That sounds promising," Stanwick said, brightening up. "Could you share the details with me?" The manager rang a bell. "Mr. Whitley," he called as a sharp-looking young man entered the room. "You can answer any questions Mr. Stanwick has regarding Mr. Welland from Acacia Avenue, Harrow." "Welland," Stanwick said, taken aback. "Is he a strong-looking, well-to-do man with that typical American businessman's face?" "No, sir," the clerk replied. "Mr. Welland is rather slender, has a pale complexion, and sports a small, fair moustache. His eyes are quite unusual, light blue with a strange gaze." A surge of excitement rushed through Stanwick. Style, he thought, thrilled. Finally, things were starting to happen. "I believe I know who you're talking about, Mr. Whitley," he said with a friendly smile, "though I knew him under a different name. Now, when did you first encounter this Mr. Welland?" "He came in one day about a year ago." The clerk hesitated. "If I could grab my books, I could give you the precise date." The manager nodded, and a moment later, the young man returned with a hefty ledger. "He first visited us on August 17th last year, and mentioned he wanted to open an account. You might recall, sir," Mr. Whitley directed his attention to the manager, "that I brought him to see you. He claimed to be in the business of bookmaking, specifically focusing on betting for dog races. He had devised a system where his bets were limited to half-crowns and multiples thereof, resulting in him accumulating a significant number of half-crowns. His deposits would therefore be made in coins of this type. On that day, he deposited £60 worth of half-crowns. It was a Wednesday, and every Wednesday since then he had come in with amounts varying from £50 to £100, all in half-crowns." "I understand," said Stanwick. "So his account has been steadily increasing." "Not quite," the young man replied. "He withdraws checks for relatively large amounts at intervals. I don't think his account has ever exceeded £500. When it reaches £400 or £500, he withdraws everything except for a few pounds." "By check?" "Yes, by check." "In whose name?" "In his own." "I suppose I shouldn't even need to ask, Mr. Whitley, if you found this entire process above board. Did it not seem unusual for a man to deposit only half-crowns?" "Well, you see," the young man explained, He provided an explanation, otherwise I would have found it odd. So, it's not unusual for silver to be deposited like that. Oh no, it's quite common. Small shopkeepers and people like them generally make weekly deposits in silver, though it's usually in coins of various types. Of course. Does Mr. Welland come in around the same time each Wednesday? Yes, always around 2 o'clock. Very well, said Stanwick. If it's okay with you, sir, he turned to the manager. I will be here at 2 o'clock next Wednesday, which is tomorrow, to meet Mr. Welland. I believe the information you've shared will be very important. I can't stress enough how crucial it is that you both keep my visit confidential and give no advance notice to Mr. Welland. As Stanwick left the bank, his thoughts were racing. So it was half-crowns, but what was the purpose behind it all? He swore in frustration as he faced the mystery again, but at least one thing was undeniably thrilling. For some time now, he had been convinced he had enough evidence to charge Style with murder, but his challenge had been that Style had disappeared. However, Style had been located, or at least he would be by the next day. That took care of 2 known members of the gang. With a bit of luck, following Style would lead him to the 3rd member, Gwen Kitteredge. This morning marked a significant breakthrough in the investigation. When he arrived at the yard, Stanwick's excitement surged even more. He found 2 additional phone messages and 2 letters waiting for him, all from bank managers, and all conveying similar information. Each manager informed him that in response to his circular, they believed the man he was looking for had been conducting business at their bank, and each one suggested he pay a visit for more details. Throughout the afternoon, Stanwick was busy. He hired a taxi and made his way to various branches, discovering at each one that Style was depositing half-crowns, just as the clerk at Knightsbridge had described. There was only one inconsistency. Each bank had seen Style on a different day of the week. He accounted for visits on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, and by calling the yard from the last branch he had visited, he was able to verify Thursday's visit as well. A similar message had arrived from yet another bank. With all this information, he felt he was close to reaching a critical turning point in the case. Once he located Style, he could see the finish line ahead. But he was frustrated as his old question resurfaced. How was Welland passing those coins to Style? The more Stanwick considered the investigation he had conducted, the more impossible it seemed that it could be happening. And yet, here was clear proof that it was occurring daily. He sat at his desk, contrary to his usual habit at the office, lit his pipe, and took long, steady puffs as he lost himself in thought. For what felt like the 100th time, he replayed the entire sequence of events in his mind. The way the girls had hidden the coins in the secret compartment of the car, the drive to the garage, Welland's walk to his office, his trip to Harrow, his round of golf, and the return to the office the next day. Each step had been analyzed and scrutinized so many times that it seemed impossible, absolutely impossible, that the coins could have vanished. And yet they had. Stanwick began to wonder if he could clarify the matter at hand. The coins definitely made it to the garage, because it was clear they weren't removed from the car while on the streets. Though it wasn't entirely proven, he leaned toward the belief that Welland didn't take the coins with him when he left the garage. The man rarely carried anything in his hands, and such a large package would certainly create an obvious bulge in his pocket. But no such bulge had been noted. It certainly seemed, therefore, that the coins must have been left behind in the garage. Even after a thorough investigation, Stanwick racked his brain to see if he had missed any possible way of accessing the garage. Suddenly, an idea struck him, filling him once again with the eager excitement that came with any breakthrough in his inquiry. The drain. Was it possible that the drain was a mere facade? Could it be the hidden connection he sought? He resolved that night to inspect it again. At 2 o'clock the following morning, he and Sergeant Patterson found themselves retracing their steps from 3 weeks prior. Waiting for the policeman to exit Tate's Lane, they climbed over the coach builder's wall and cautiously made their way to the garage, using Patterson's key to let themselves in. "I'm not convinced about this drain, Patterson," Stanwick said earnestly. "I want to make sure there's nothing more here than meets the eye. Let's cover this up again." They lifted the manhole cover, and Patterson descended into the inspection chamber to examine the 3 pipes one by one. Stanwick, lying in the pit, managed to look through the pipe connecting the pit to the chamber. Patterson's flashlight illuminated it fully, revealing every detail. The connection was completely clear, with no breaks or junctions, and Stanwick had to concede that it offered no new information. The second pipe leading from the chamber was the outfall, complete with an intercepting trap. Here, too, their investigation confirmed that everything was functioning as it should. The trap was filled with water, and when Patterson removed the disc sealing the pipe directly above it, a wave of foul gases escaped, confirming that the sewer connection was valid. All that remained was the ventilating pipe, which clearly passed beneath the floor to the vertical shaft and then up to the roof. "That's all good, Mr. Stanwick. You don't need to worry about it. It's just a standard vent pipe," Patterson assured him, but Stanwick remained unconvinced. "I need to verify the connection," he insisted. "Could you go up on the roof, Patterson, and pour some water down to see if it comes out here?" The pipe exited through the roof at the back of the garage, directly opposite the entrance. After some effort, Patterson scaled the wall between the yard and the neighboring property. He then shuffled across the roof, and with the can of water Stanwick handed him, poured it down the pipe. A gurgling noise followed by a rush of water filling the inspection chamber quickly verified that the connection was solid. "Damn it," Stanwick thought in frustration. "This thing is useless too. It must be that blasted office after all." "Did it come through as expected?" Patterson called out upon re-entering the garage, glancing down into the inspection chamber. "I had a feeling you wouldn't find anything there, Mr. Stanwick." "It's all perfectly normal." He descended once more into the inspection chamber and started pushing his ruler up the ventilating pipe. Stanwick watched him absently while he tried to figure out the problem. Then a sudden exclamation from Patterson caught his attention. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. "Found something?" "I'm not entirely sure, Mr. Stanwick, but this is odd." "What is it?" Stanwick leaned over the chamber. "Look here." Patterson measured the distance along the floor from the chamber to the vertical pipe. It was exactly 3 feet 4. "Now look at this," he said. He climbed back into the chamber and inserted the ruler into the horizontal pipe. Stanwick watched, holding his breath, as the 3-foot rule vanished, followed by Patterson's entire arm. "There it is, Mr. Stanwick," Patterson stated. "That pipe is clear. The vent pipe is only connected to a T, not a bend. Let's find out how far it goes." Eagerly, Patterson stepped outside, glanced around the yard, and fetched some thin laths. He pushed one up the pipe, then tied on the others like segments of a fishing rod, and shoved the entire assembly in. It reached about 10 feet, 3 times the distance to the vertical vent pipe. At the end of those 10 feet, it hit something solid. "What's the idea, Patterson? What could that pipe be for?" "Not for ventilation, I assure you, Mr. Stanwick. If it only extended a foot past the vertical pipe, I might think the builder was using an old T. But this pipe has definitely been extended on purpose for at least another 5 feet. "Through the wall." "Definitely through the wall. I'd love to see where that pipe leads in the next building." Stanwick grinned in delight. "You will, Patterson," he laughed. "Let's go over now and take a look. Grab your sticks and cover up that manhole so everything looks just as we left it." They tidied up after themselves, and, extinguishing their torches, slipped back into the stillness of the night. Chapter 14. The property adjoining. The 2 men paused after relocking the door behind them, scanning the darkness and listening intently. The night was pitch black. Without a moon and clouds blanketing the sky, even the feeble light of the stars was obscured. Above the wall that bordered Tate's Lane, they could faintly see the upper floors of the houses across the way, illuminated by the street lamps. In every other direction, there was not a glimmer of light. It was eerily quiet. Aside from the distant yowl of a wandering cat and a train whistle echoing from afar, not a single sound interrupted the stillness. Satisfied they had not been seen, Patterson took a step back, and Stanwick hoisted himself onto the wall separating the two properties. Patterson followed, and both men dropped quietly to the ground on the other side. "This is what we're looking for," Stanwick whispered, feeling along the building beside them. "This is where our pipe connects for sure." It was another shed, nearly identical in shape to the garage, lined up end to end with it. "We need to get inside," Stanwick continued. "See if you can crack the lock." "It's a chub like the one before," Patterson replied. "I doubt we'll manage it." He fumbled for a moment, then exclaimed, "By Jove, I can do it after all. The same key fits both. Here you go, Mr. Stanwick. Luck is on our side." "That shows the same people are running both places, though we hardly needed that to confirm it. Come inside and shut the door." Once the door was closed, Stanwick carefully switched on his flashlight. The shed was a garage, just like Welland. It had the same cement walls and floor, the same window, pit and bench, the same manhole cover and ventilation pipe. There was no car, but there was something far more intriguing. Hanging from hooks beneath the bench was a 12-foot sewer cleaner's serpent. A flexible rod with a pair of jagged jaws on one end, operated by a Bowden wire from the other. "There it is," Stanwick said, pointing at the rod. "That's the proof we needed. That's what he uses to get those bags of half-crowns through the pipe. But to make absolutely sure, Patterson, you should head back to that other garage and shine your light into the pipe. I'll keep watch here." While Patterson was gone, Stanwick made a sketch of the pipes for his report. A copy of it is included here. After a moment, a muffled voice echoed from the drain, and Stanwick, crouching down in the inspection chamber, saw Patterson's flashlight flickering in the distance. "That's it," Stanwick whispered down the pipe. "Come back, and we'll check around here." Now they faced a more challenging task. Starting from the garage, they carefully felt their way along the various walls, pacing their lengths and estimating the angles between them. It was tricky work in the dark, but Stanwick was too wary of being discovered to turn on his flashlight. When they finally made their way back to their starting point, they returned to the garage, where Stanwick sketched based on their measurements. The area appeared to be an irregularly shaped yard, surrounded by buildings. Judging by the debris in one corner, mostly old crates, the place seemed more like a workshop than a private home. Across from the garage, an arched passageway ran under one of the structures, leading to a set of tightly shut gates. A faint light beneath the gates suggested they opened onto a street. "I need to mark that entrance gate," Stanwick said as he put away his sketch. "We need to locate it from the street outside." He paused, thinking. "I've got it," he continued. "Here's a penny. We'll push it out underneath and then go around to see if we can find it." They carried out this plan. After ensuring they had left no signs of their visit, they locked the garage, slipped the penny under the large gate, and climbed back, first into the builder's yard and then onto Tate's Lane. They then walked around the block to Killowen Street, looking for a suitable gateway. There were several options, but at the third one they spotted their penny and realized they had arrived at their destination. The entrance was next to a shop, and when Stanwick read the sign, he felt a mix of amazement and confusion. It read, "Theobald and Grudgeon, working silversmiths." "Good heavens, could it be their coining after all?" he whispered in shock. If that were true, what happened to the report from the mint? That report had practically confirmed that counterfeit coins weren't being circulated, and now here was striking evidence that suggested otherwise. He swore under his breath, but it hardly provided the relief he expected. "It seems to me that those mint folks have been fooled just like we have," he muttered. "Well, Patterson, there's nothing more we can do right now. Let's head home." He contemplated whether it would be wise to return to the silversmiths the next morning, or rather that morning, since it was already past 4 o'clock. What he really wanted was to catch style. The silversmiths could wait. If he went to Theobald and Grudgeon's, he might run into someone from the gang. That would raise the alarm and might scatter the members, making it much harder to round them up. No, on second thought, he decided to lay low for the morning. He planned to visit the bank at 2 o'clock, where he could either arrest Style or follow him home, which seemed more likely. That route might lead him to Gwen Kitteredge and possibly other members of the gang. However, the next morning, an unexpected turn of events changed everything and propelled him straight to the silversmiths and any other place where he might gather news about the trio. He had been busy with routine work related to the case. He had started by calling the inspector of the York Road district to gather any information available about Messrs. Theobald and Grudgeon and their business. After that, he had gone to the Mint to report his findings and politely inquire whether there might have been an error in their assessment of the half-crown he had sent them. The very senior officer who received him was firm in his response. There could be no mistake. The tests yielded absolutely conclusive results. Whether or not they were silversmiths, the coins he had provided were genuine. No sooner had Stanwick returned to the yard than the unexpected news hit him. As he settled at his desk, the telephone rang. "Is this Mr. Stanwick, the inspector?" asked a woman's voice that Stanwick vaguely recognized, but couldn't quite place. "I'm Mrs. Cruce from 27 Nelson Street." Nelson Street. Of course, she was the owner of Marley Moran's boarding house. "Yes, Mrs. Cruce. Inspector Stanwick here. How can I assist you?" "It's about Miss Moran," she continued. "She didn't come back after the performance last night, and I'm worried about her. I wouldn't usually think much of it, except for your inquiries here. Sometimes a girl goes home with friends and doesn't always remember to call her boarding house, but Marley was always careful about that." Stanwick's heart nearly stopped. Could it be? Had those vile criminals taken her, just like they did with Thurza Smithson and the two other unfortunate girls? "Did you contact the cinema?" he asked urgently. "Yes, but by the time I started to worry, it was too late. You see, Marley often comes home close to midnight, and I only happened to be up around 1 when I realized she hadn't arrived. I called the cinema first thing this morning, but I've just now gotten through to them. They said she didn't show up for work yesterday. I hope she's all right." Stanwick tensed, convinced that his worst fears had been confirmed. Why hadn't the Panopticon people called him? Stanwick promised himself a serious conversation with the manager later, but first he needed to organize a search. In emergencies, he always rose to the occasion. After confirming the landlady's account with a quick call to the Panopticon, he focused intently on his next steps. For 30 seconds, he sat still, staring blankly at his polished desk as he considered his strategy. Then, deliberately, but without wasting time, he began to put his plan into action. His first move was to rush to Chief Inspector Mitchell's office, share the news, and outline his approach to the situation. Stanwick already had warrants for the arrest of all 3 known members of the gang, but now he needed search warrants for Welland's house and office, as well as for the premises of the silversmiths, Messrs. Theobald and Grudgeon. Mitchell agreed with all of Stanwick's proposals. Next, Stanwick called several men into his office. "I believe you are all familiar with the case I'm working on," he began, his voice steady but commanding. "Beginning with the Portsmouth murder, I've uncovered a gang of criminals who have killed 3 cinema paybox girls because they feared those women were about to reveal their secrets to the police. I've just learned that a 4th girl has gone missing, Miss Marley Moran, who worked in the box office of the Panopticon Cinema on Leicester Square. You've seen her, Carter, and you too, Harvey. She's fallen into the gang's hands like the others, and has been working for them. Just the day before yesterday, she shared her story with me, and it seems they might have caught on and silenced her." He paused, and the men nodded solemnly in response. "She left her boarding house on Nelson Street at her usual time yesterday morning, and hasn't been seen since. If they've got her, we have to act fast." The men nodded in agreement, and Stanwick continued with his instructions. "You, Carter, take 2 of your team and bring in Curtis Welland. I have a warrant ready that outlines everything. Here's his description and the locations where we believe he might be. You can manage the details from here, but we need this done without any mistakes. Bring him in quickly." Sergeant Carter took off without hesitation, and Stanwick turned to the next man. "Harvey, I need you to investigate the situation at the Panopticon Cinema. You might catch a lead on someone or hear about a letter or phone call. Let the yard know if you find anything." Harvey left just as quickly, and Stanwick continued. Pickford, check the boarding house. Here's the address and all the details. I shouldn't need to remind you of what to do." With that, the gears of the CID began to turn, and the trap was being meticulously laid. In addition to Carter and his team, others were dispatched to keep an eye on all the places Welland was known to frequent: his home, his office, the garage, and his golf club. They were to follow up with his housekeeper, the other tenants in the office building, the staff at the coach builder's yard, and the secretary and members of the golf club. The 3 girls known to be caught up in the gang were to be surveilled, and any gang member seen approaching them was to be apprehended immediately. Teams were sent to each of the 6 banks where Style had deposited half-crowns, in case he decided to withdraw his money. Stanwick reserved the final inquiry for himself. "Patterson," he wrapped up, "you and I will check out that silversmith's yard. I've got a search warrant, but I'd rather avoid using it if I can. Better get a couple of guys to keep an eye on the door while we're inside." 15 minutes later, Stanwick and Patterson turned into Killowen Street, strolling casually toward Theobald and Grudgeon's place. The large gate where they had slipped through the penny was open, so they walked in without hesitation. The entry led through the building to a yard at the back. In the corner across from them stood the garage, and along the back of the yard was a wall separating their premises from the neighboring coach builder. The other sides were bordered by buildings that were all grimy and in disrepair. 3 doors lined the yard, one left ajar, while another, likely from the office or shop, opened into the side wall of the entry. The yard itself was a mess, littered with old boxes and various debris in the corners. Stanwick paused for a moment to take in these details, pleased with how accurately he had sketched the layout. He then walked slowly toward the open door. He found himself on the threshold of a decently sized workshop, equipped with several benches and a few simple machines. In one corner stood a gas oven with crucibles, presumably for melting silver. Nearby was what looked like a miniature foundry. Several benches housed small lathes, but most of the machinery was for smoothing and polishing. The place appeared to have once been bustling and successful, but now it was neglected. Much like the yard, it was dirty and disordered, and the entire workforce consisted of 3 elderly men, also shabby and clearly past their prime. One man hovered over the gas oven as if preparing to make a cast, while the others filed and polished silver ornaments. "Could I see the manager?" Stanwick asked, after offering the men a courteous good morning. The man at the gas oven turned off a valve and shuffled over. "He's not in yet, as far as I know," he replied. "Have you checked the office?" "Not there," Stanwick lied smoothly. "Aye. He hasn't come in yet. He usually arrives in his car around 10 or half past, but this morning he's still not here. Did you need something?" "Yes, I need a quote for a silver trowel and casket for laying a foundation stone. But I suppose it's best if I speak to the boss about it." "Right, no one here can help you with that. Please take a seat in the office. The boss won't be long." "I can wait. I'm not in a hurry." Stanwick pulled out his cigarette case and offered it. "I think I know your boss," he continued casually, "but I can't seem to remember his name. He's a rather slender man, about average height, with a pale complexion and a small, fair mustache, right, and rather striking eyes." "That's him. You've described him perfectly. Welland, they call him, Mr. Curtis Welland." "Right, Welland, I remember now. Lives out in Harrow." "I wouldn't know. He's never invited me to dinner." "That's his loss," Stanwick said with a smile. He looked around the workshop. "It's a fine place you have here. Seems a bit large for just 3 men, doesn't it?" The old man shook his head sadly. "It used to be a great shop, but times have changed. I remember when there were 20 men working here, producing good work and plenty of it. Now there are only 3 of us, and we hardly have anything to do. It was a dark day for us when the old master sold the place." "So the business has changed hands?" "Yeah, about a year ago. Old Mr. Grudgeon owned it. Mr. Theobald passed away 5 years ago. I suppose Mr. Grudgeon was just too tired to carry on. He was 70 if he was a day. So he sold it to Mr. Welland, and the old man paused before adding, somehow the work declined, and most of the men were let go. But truth be told, I can't complain." I'm still here, even though younger men have been let go. Indeed, it's been a tough time for trade, Stanwick replied sympathetically. Your trade is a luxury one, so I imagine the hard times hit you harder than most. That's right, sir. What sort of work do you mainly do? Stanwick continued, feigning interest in a way that suggested he had all the time in the world. We used to handle all sorts, statuettes, plaques, trophy cups, vases, medallions, and such. But these days, we barely do anything, just lids for ink pots, penholders, backs for fancy clothes, brushes, and stoppers for toilet bottles for suitcases. That's about it. I assume Mr. Welland manages the sales himself. You don't have a travelling salesman. No, it's just Mr. Welland and the boy you saw in the office. Stanwick continued to converse casually as he wandered around the shop. He didn't glean much from the man's talk, but he was reassured that, aside from perhaps in some hidden cellar, no illegal coining was taking place. The old man confirmed that whatever was still being produced moved from the workshop to the office, where Welland sold it. The worker knew nothing about the business side. Silver arrived in bars or ingots, usually by motor truck, and was stored in a sturdy shed next to Welland's garage, which only Welland had access to. The man didn't know where it came from. Since he couldn't extract any more information, Stanwick told him he didn't think he could wait for Mr. Welland that day and planned to return later. After wishing the old man a good day, he exited the yard. Patterson was waiting for him in the archway. Styles running this operation under the name of Welland, Stanwick said quietly. He took it over about a year ago. There's a boy in the office, too. I intend to conduct a search. Come with me. Patterson nodded, and the two men stepped out into the street and into the shop. A glass door opened with a bell that chimed, leading them into a dim and dishevelled showroom. A counter ran along the front, behind which were display cases filled with plaster models. These cases acted like a barrier, separating the showroom from the office area behind. In the back, a small green safe, a letter file, and two desks could be seen. One desk, a roll-top, was closed, while the other was a tall desk with a brass rail and a bookstand on top. A window in the back wall overlooked the yard, and a door in the side wall led to the entryway. Dirty calendars and poorly hung advertising plates cluttered the walls. Seated at the tall desk was a young man of about 20, pen in hand, with a ledger opened before him. Stanwick thought he had never seen a clerk who looked so completely lacking in intelligence. He observed as the young man clumsily tried to hide a well-worn novelette with an eye-catching cover. Then he said kindly, "May I see Mr. Welland, please?" The young man shoved the novelette into his pocket and shuffled over to the counter. "He ain't here," he said flatly. "I can see that," Stanwick replied, scanning the room. "Do you know when he will be back?" "No." Stanwick fixed the young man with a stern gaze. "Now, listen here," he said sharply. "We're police officers, and we're looking for Mr. Welland. When was he here last?" The young man stared blankly, and it took another repetition of the question, this time with more urgency, to rouse him. "Yesterday morning," he answered sullenly. Apparently, Welland had arrived at his usual time, around 10:30. He typically stayed until 1 o'clock for lunch, but this time he had only stuck around for a few minutes. He had sent the young man on an errand, and when he returned half an hour later, Welland was gone. The young man hadn't seen him since. Stanwick was not pleased. "What was the message?" he asked, an arrow aiming to gather more information, but to his surprise, it struck true against the joints of Styles' armor. "A postal order for 2 shillings, the young man replied. "That shouldn't have taken you half an hour." "He didn't want any order," the youth insisted, a sly, shifty look crossing his face. "He just wanted me out of the way." "Why do you think that?" The youth gave a grin that was more unsettling than pleasant. "The girl," he said flatly. "The girl? What girl?" "The girl who came in with him." "A tall, strong girl with fair hair and blue eyes?" Stanwick asked eagerly, thinking he was onto something with Gwen Kitteredge. "Nah, she's small and dark." Stanwick jumped to his feet. "What?" he exclaimed, startling the youth nearly out of his wits. Marley Moran. He paused, excitement coursing through him, then sat back down again. That's fine, he said. I was just caught off guard. Now tell me everything about this girl. When did she arrive? Extracting information from the young man was like trying to siphon treacle from a test tube, but with a great deal of patience, Stanwick managed to piece it together. It turned out that when Style arrived, he had driven his dark green Armstrong Siddeley sedan into the yard, as was his habit. Instead of parking it, he had backed it into the entry, stopping right in front of the office door. He then rushed back out to the street. Clearly, Marley, further questioning left no doubt about the identity of the girl, had been waiting for him, as they both entered the office at the same time. Style had asked her to sit down, then excused himself, claiming urgent business in the workshops. A few moments later, the speaking tube from the workshops whistled. It was Style, instructing the young man to go out immediately and buy a 2-shilling postal order. Never before had such a request been made, and the young man thought it unnecessary. He figured the errand was merely a way to get him out of the way, allowing for the intimate conversations he assumed Style and his visitor wished to have. Believing this, he took the opportunity to visit a friend, the errand boy at a nearby shop, returning only half an hour later. By then, Style and the young lady had already left. Stanwick let out a frustrated sigh. After my warning, he muttered to Patterson, his voice low. How on earth did that villain manage to ensnare her? He turned back to the young man. We're going to search this place, he said sharply. Here's our warrant if you'd like to see it. Now give me any keys you have, and sit down over there without interfering. As he spoke, he shut and bolted the heavy outer door. Ignoring the clerk's timid objections, the two men began their search. The safe was beyond their reach, so Stanwick called for an expert from the yard. The roll-top desk, however, was easily opened with Stanwick's skeleton keys. Working quickly but methodically, the two men rummaged through the office, and then the workshops behind it for a couple of hours before Stanwick declared he was satisfied. Though the search had produced little, what they found was significant. They had no leads on Styles' whereabouts or information about the other gang members. There was even less to suggest what had happened to Marley Moran, although Stanwick's detailed sketches of Styles' car and descriptions from the old worker could assist in tracking her down later. Two clear conclusions emerged without a doubt. First, the silversmith's business was practically non-existent, serving merely as a facade to disguise far more serious and profitable activities. While hardly any silver items had been sold, there was a significant amount of bar silver that had been purchased. Regardless of any reports from the mint, it was clear that something substantial was happening. Coining was taking place on a massive scale. Stanwick's first priority had to be locating the operation. Or rather, his top priority was to ensure Marley Moran's safety, if it was at all possible. As Stanwick pondered these matters in his office, the expert from the yard was hard at work. He soon called out that he had managed to open the safe. Stanwick leaned forward eagerly to sift through its contents, but found only one item of interest: 4 small leather bags designed to fit neatly in vanity cases, each containing between 100 and 150 half-crowns. Convinced he might finally have uncovered the key to the mystery, he poured the coins onto the desk and examined them closely. Once again, he felt a wave of disappointment. He would have sworn that every single one of them was authentic. Every test he conducted confirmed their genuineness. Then, quite suddenly, a thought struck him. All of the coins were dated 1921. Whether this had any significance, he couldn't tell, but he knew they needed to be sent to the mint for a definitive assessment. With his anxiety regarding Marley's fate growing, Stanwick headed back to the yard, clinging to hope that some useful information might have come in. Chapter 15. Mr. Cullimore Explains. Stanwick was deeply troubled by the disappearance of Marley Moran. He couldn't shake the thought that if anything happened to her, he carried a heavy burden of responsibility. There was no doubt that it was through him that she had attracted the attention of the gang, and he had led her to believe she could trust him completely. Bitterly, he regretted not having arranged for someone to keep an eye on her to prevent her kidnapping. Time and again, he cursed his oversight and vowed to do everything in his power to rescue her, and if, unfortunately, he failed, to bring her captors to justice. There was little he could do personally except stay in his room and gather and analyze the information that began trickling in. Despite his inquiries yielding some results, most of the information was unhelpful. The first update came from the men he had sent to the banks where Style cashed his half-crowns. None of them had seen him. This was Thursday, and since Tuesday he had neither deposited half-crowns nor written any checks. With nearly £500 in total across all 6 accounts, it was clear he was frightened, likely having abandoned the money. Phone calls from the other operatives were equally disheartening. Sergeant Harvey called to report that he had found nothing at the Panopticon. Miss Moran had left at her usual time on Tuesday evening, and an assistant who walked with her to the tube station said that her comments suggested she planned to be at work the next day. Unfortunately, there was no news from her boarding house either. On Wednesday night, she had not returned after the show. That was the crushing reality. She hadn't sent any message to explain her absence, nor had she hinted to anyone that she might not be home. Even more concerning was Carter's report. He hadn't been able to apprehend Curtis Welland because Welland had also vanished. The man hadn't returned home that Wednesday evening, nor had he been seen since. However, his housekeeper wasn't worried about him, as he had sent her a telegram that Wednesday afternoon, saying he was unexpectedly called away on business and would be gone for a few days. His usual spots had been watched, and thorough inquiries had produced nothing. The 3 other Berks office girls who had been exchanging coins were questioned as well, but they didn't yield any information. Initially, all 3 denied ever meeting Welland or being involved in any shady dealings with half-crowns, but under police questioning, they eventually broke down and admitted their part in it. Yet they all claimed that Wednesday was the last day they saw Welland. None of them had seen Style in many weeks. However, one crucial piece of information came to light, something essential to the whole investigation. At any other time, it would have sent Stanwick into the usual state of enthusiastic excitement he typically showed in such situations. But now, he was so preoccupied with concern for Marley Moran's safety that he took the news in stride. Returning to the yard after another visit to the girls' boarding house on Nelson Street, he found himself in demand. "The chief wants to see you, sir," was the word from the first 3 officers he encountered. Inspector Tanner, whom he passed on his way to his office, called out, "Hello, Stanwick, my lad. You've really stirred things up. There's been no peace here this morning searching for Brer Stanwick." Before Stanwick could respond, a sergeant approached him. "Excuse me, sir, but the Assistant Commissioner wants to see you in his office as soon as possible." "Good grief," Stanwick exclaimed. "What's all the fuss about?" "All right, Sergeant. I'm heading out now." Sir Mortimer Ellison, the Assistant Commissioner, was seated at his desk in his neatly furnished but unpretentious office when Stanwick walked in. Accompanying him were 2 other men, clearly important figures based on their attire and demeanor. One was small, with white hair and a precise appearance, while the other was a younger man who clearly looked up to him. All 3 were smoking the luxurious Turkish cigarettes that Sir Mortimer favored. The older man was speaking, while the others listened intently. "Come in, Stanwick," Sir Mortimer said, interrupting the conversation. "You've arrived just in time. This is the inspector handling the case, gentlemen. Stanwick, let me introduce Mr. Cullimore and Mr. Dove from the Mint. They've come to discuss that silver bombshell you sent down." "What, sir?" Stanwick exclaimed. "So the coins were indeed counterfeit?" "Indeed." Sir Mortimer waved a hand towards Stanwick, raising an eyebrow at the others. "Listen to Scotland Yard. Stanwick, I think your mind is a bit twisted. Why should you take pleasure in the fact that the esteemed institution our friends represent has fallen victim to a fraud?" Stanwick knew his superior well. "I'm just pleased to inform them, sir, that thanks to Scotland Yard, the fraud has been uncovered," he replied, keeping a straight face. "There's Scotland Yard again. When you have no answer, change the subject. I do it myself, so I recognize the tactic. Now, Stanwick, take a seat and tell us everything." Yet Stanwick stood there, a puzzled look on his face. "But what about?" he started, then hesitated. "What is it, Stanwick?" "Apologies, sir, but this only concerns the second batch of coins. The first batch was legitimate." "That's correct," Mr. Cullimore interjected in his thin, precise voice. "The first batch was indeed genuine. It is solely this second batch that is in question." "That's a bit puzzling, sir," Stanwick continued, addressing the Assistant Commissioner. "I would have expected the opposite. The first batch was given to the girl Moran to distribute to the public, while the second was stored in Styles' safe. Why would they hand out good coins?" "You've got it all mixed up. Those coins you received from the girl must have come from the public, not the gang." Stanwick shook his head. "No, sir, I'm absolutely certain about that. Miss Moran put the coins she collected from the public in the car. What she gave me were taken from the car for distribution." There was a brief silence before Sir Mortimer spoke again. "Well, if I can't prove you wrong, I'll have to think of another approach. How about this? Those people are sharper than you seem to think. They realized you were onto them and played it smart. Is there any chance they could have figured out what you were planning?" "Through the girls, sir," Stanwick admitted. "I recognized the risk, but I had to take it." "There you have it. The girls reported your activities, and Welland, Style & Co. decided it was safer to use legitimate currency. Look, Stanwick, when these gentlemen contacted me to set up a meeting, I expected Chief Inspector Mitchell to be here to guide me on the case until you returned. However, Mitchell has been delayed in Croydon, so I haven't been able to tell them more than the basic details. Now, start from the beginning and provide us with all the information." "About the cinema girls, sir?" "No, about the silver. I've already explained how the distribution through the cinema girls works, and that's all these gentlemen need to know regarding that matter. You should focus on everything directly related to the silver." "I'm afraid there's not much to report, sir. All I've discovered is—" And Stanwick went on to detail his investigations. He described the distribution and transportation of the coins, the vanity bags, the secret panel beneath the seat of Welland's car, and the pipe connecting the two garages. Then he read out his notes on what he had found in the office, particularly the discrepancies in the weights of silver and copper purchased versus the weight of silver ornaments sold. The three men listened intently, and Mr. Cullimore congratulated him warmly when he finished. "That is the most clever deception I've seen in quite some time," he stated. "I must admit, if it hadn't been for our friend here, it might have continued for ages. No one would have suspected those coins just by looking at them. They appear flawless. It was only through careful testing in our labs that we discovered they were counterfeit." "Created by a skilled hand?" Sir Mortimer asked. "Absolutely. It's astonishing how well they were made. I've showed them to several of our team, and each one confirmed they were convincing, men with extensive experience, I should add. It's no surprise that Miss Moran's bank clerk friend was fooled. You see, Mr. Cullimore took over the conversation, clearly pleased. There are 4 main tests for a silver coin. Its visual appeal, which includes the feel and texture as well as the design, its weight, its composition, and its sound when struck. All of these tests were passed or overlooked, with the exception of composition, which was nearly accurate. "I'm not sure I completely understand," said Sir Mortimer, and Stanwick nodded in agreement. "Let's talk about composition. The composition of these coins matched exactly what we produce at the mint. In other words, the counterfeit coins contained genuine material in terms of silver, at least as closely as possible, without our incredibly precise methods of measuring the ingredients. It actually required our precise methods to identify the discrepancies. That's what I meant by stating that the composition test was practically met." The Assistant Commissioner nodded. "The metal composition in our current silver standards," Mr. Cullimore continued, "is 50% silver and 50% alloy, mainly copper. You'll see my point when I tell you that these counterfeit coins contained at least 48.63% and no more than 51.12% silver, with the rest being alloy. Nothing there to raise any suspicion." "But your people noticed the inconsistency." Mr. Cullimore shrugged. We did, but it's not something we take pride in. It's best to keep quiet about that part of the affair. My point is, no one would have suspected anything was wrong just by looking at the coins. Sir Mortimer nodded again. You mentioned 3 other tests. Yes, those concerning design, weight, and wear. Let's start with the first. I'm sure you're aware, Sir Mortimer, that no matter how meticulously a coin is replicated, small flaws will inevitably appear. Dust particles or tiny imperfections in the original can lead to differences. While these may not be visible to the naked eye, a microscope will reveal them. Any coins made as replicas, that is, not struck from the original dies, will show microscopic defects in the design detail. Do you understand? Absolutely. Now, regarding weight. This primarily hinges on the thickness of the coin, and the correct thickness can only be achieved by the sophisticated machinery at the mint. It's hardly believable that a counterfeiter could even acquire one of those machines. Together, these 2 tests are therefore quite reliable and convincing. Then surely these counterfeit coins could have been detected by such methods. Ah, Mr. Cullimore replied, making a small gesture as he emphasized his point. That's exactly what I anticipated you would say, and it's where the cleverness of this gang comes into play. They found a way to get around these 2 tests in the simplest and most natural manner imaginable. They made the coins look worn. Look worn? Yes, in some way we can only speculate. They manufactured wear. Our engineers suspect they used very fine sand in some sort of rotary device, because the microscope shows that the wear consists of numerous fine scratches and marks. Normal wear from circulation might show some scratches, but it typically leaves the higher points of the design relatively smooth. However, what I would call this imitation of wear was quite impressively executed. Only the microscope could have distinguished the difference, he said. And that had the effect. Yes, Mr. Cullimore interrupted, eager not to forfeit his moment. Don't you see? That blurred the design, making minor defects undetectable. It also lightened the coin, rendering the weight test useless. Ingenious, right? Seems like a rather obvious precaution, the Assistant Commissioner remarked, irritated that Mr. Cullimore had preempted him. True enough, Cullimore conceded, but figuring out how to do it isn't so straightforward. Regardless, it's all quite fascinating. What about the ring? Mr. Cullimore leaned back, his enthusiasm waning. The ring, he echoed. That's trickier to explain. It relies on various factors, like the exact hardness of the coins. Even with meticulous minting, not all coins sound the same. Each must be tested individually, and any that don't ring correctly are discarded. I suspect our counterfeiters followed the same process. After Mr. Cullimore finished, a moment of silence fell over the group. Sir Mortimer busied himself handing out fresh cigarettes. Once they were lit, Stanwick spoke up. There's something that's been troubling me since I realized these folks were counterfeiting. How does it make financial sense for them? Surely, it must cost nearly half a crown to create a half-crown. No, Mr. Cullimore replied. That's precisely the issue. It should be very profitable for them. As you know, during the war, the price of silver rose, making coins worth more when melted down than as currency. This actually resulted in a significant loss of coins. To address the situation, the silver content was decreased. It used to be 92.5%, but in 1920 it dropped to the 50% I mentioned earlier. Since then, the price of silver has fallen again. The current market price stands at about 2 shillings per ounce. Consequently, the silver content in a half-crown amounts to less than 6p. Let's just say 6p for simplicity. The cost of the alloy and manufacturing, including overhead, would at most add another 6p. Thus, they could produce a half-crown for around a shilling, reaping an 18p profit on each coin. That, as things currently stand, is the unfortunate reality. Good heavens! Stanwick exclaimed, turning to Sir Mortimer. That makes one wonder why the primary trade of the British Isles isn't counterfeiting coins. That's a valid question, Stanwick. I have been pondering the same thing. I suppose the difficulty lies in distribution. Exactly, Sir Mortimer, Mr. Cullimore replied. Any skilled person could produce coins good enough to pass, but it takes a mastermind to successfully offload enough to cover the costs. That's why most people with such ideas opt for printing notes instead. If you can make 8 or 9 shillings for every 10-shilling note you get rid of, it suddenly becomes worthwhile, especially since exchanging notes is so straightforward. However, you can't exchange half-crowns in the same easy manner. Some system similar to what Mr. Stanwick's acquaintances devised is necessary, and that's where the complications emerge. That's certainly where it fell apart here, Stanwick said. The distribution was the weak point of the entire operation. Indeed, it has proven to be, Mr. Cullimore acknowledged. Nonetheless, I still consider it an exceptionally clever scheme. The more you dissect the problem, the more you'll appreciate its vast complexity. Just imagine it, Mr. Stanwick. How would you have approached it? Oh, come now, Mr. Cullimore, Sir Mortimer said gravely. Let's not have him self-incriminate. If you pose questions like that, he might start revealing that such actions are frowned upon at the Yard. Stanwick chuckled. That, sir, is the crux of the matter. Still, if I were to devise a scheme, I'd certainly choose one that didn't leave me at the mercy of 4 Berks office girls. That was what tipped the whole thing off. If the girls had been part of the conspiracy, it might never have been uncovered. However, the worry that they might reveal the plan led to their involvement. I'm starting to see the truth in your statement, Sir Mortimer, about the Yard's tendency to assume rather than investigate, Mr. Cullimore said dryly. But I'm still not sure I grasp Mr. Stanwick's point. You claim, Mr. Stanwick, that the girls exposed the scheme, but I understood that wasn't the case. Not directly, sir, but the gang feared they might talk and resorted to murder for protection. It was the murder that exposed them. Ah, I understand now. Mr. Cullimore waved the point away and shifted the discussion. I suppose there's no way to estimate how many of these counterfeit half-crowns are out there. You provided me with some statistics on that, Stanwick. Please locate them. All I can offer is this, sir. Miss Moran mentioned she circulated between 100 and 150 a day. I personally took in a minimum of 700 to 800 per week. If all 4 girls were doing the same, that would total around 3,000 per week, or roughly 150,000 a year. We believe this conspiracy has been ongoing for about that long. Nearly £19,000 worth of counterfeit currency in circulation. Mr. Cullimore shook his head. It's bad, but it could be worse. And nearly £12,000 a year in profit, Sir Mortimer added. Quite a lucrative little operation, especially if those profits are divided among just 3 people. What will your department do about it, Mr. Cullimore? Mr. Cullimore regarded him sharply. That really poses quite a challenge, Sir Mortimer, he admitted. For all practical purposes, the money is legitimate. Moreover, recalling it would be nearly impossible. At this moment, I must concede that I don't see any option other than to accept it as genuine and allow it to continue circulating. Of course, I'm speaking off the cuff and without thorough consideration. But that's where I stand now. For a while, they continued to discuss the issue before Mr. Cullimore said, What puzzles me is the remarkable skill with which those coins were produced. This group must have some sort of technical training, and it's not a craft that many pursue. You know nothing about their identities, of course. Sir Mortimer shook his head. We have descriptions, but so far they haven't brought us any closer. However, I understand your point about the need for technical expertise, and we will definitely investigate that angle. That sounds just like Jim Sibley. What do you think, Mr. Cullimore? A new voice chimed in, catching Stanwick's attention. He turned with surprise to Dove, who had remained silent until now. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he had a hand in this, Mr. Cullimore replied. He's the only person I know who could pull off such work. Sir Mortimer, you haven't come across a stocky, red-haired man in your inquiries, have you? Not so far. Who exactly is Jim Sibley, if I may ask? Until 3 years ago, he was an engineer at the Mint. He worked with us for about 7 years, and I can honestly say, aside from our current company, he was the most incredibly skilled person I've ever met. He knew everything there was to know about coining and could do anything with his hands. He was remarkably resourceful, too. It was impressive to watch him tackle a problem, especially when it required his clever adaptation of tools or machines. As Mr. Dove mentioned, this coining operation certainly has his mark on it. Why did he leave your employment, Mr. Cullimore? The small man shrugged lightly. We found that rejected coins were disappearing. We were convinced he was stealing them, but we couldn't prove it, so we asked him to go. And did the theft stop? Yes, once he left, there were no more issues. There was no doubt about his guilt, but he was clever enough to keep us from getting proof. Sir Mortimer remained silent, so Stanwick inquired if Mr. Cullimore could explain what rejected coins were and why someone would steal them. Rejected coins are those that are complete but fail to pass certain tests. For example, a half-crown that otherwise looks perfect might not ring quite right. As a result, it gets rejected and sent back to the furnace for remelting. To the thief, who would presumably put it back into circulation, its worth is just 2 and 6 pence. That's a useful insight about this Sibley, sir, Stanwick said to the Assistant Commissioner. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask these gentlemen for more details about him. Of course, Stanwick. Gather as much information as you can while you have the opportunity. However, neither visitor could provide details that might lead to Sibley's capture. It was decided that Stanwick would send someone to the Mint to check records and gather information from other staff members. I would go myself, sir, Stanwick continued, but I'd rather not leave the yard right now. I want to be here in case any news about that girl comes in. Precisely. Sir Mortimer turned to the others. Inspector Stanwick is quite troubled about the potential fate of one of the 4 girls who were exchanging coins for these criminals. After, shall I say, gaining her trust, she has vanished, and there's evidence suggesting she was kidnapped. The 3 girls who preceded her were also abducted and regrettably murdered, likely under similar circumstances. When I asked her for her trust, I promised to protect her, Stanwick explained quietly. You mustn't hold yourself responsible, Sir Mortimer insisted. I understand your feelings, but don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. You acted with good intentions, and no one can know everything. Thank you, sir. But you understand why I want to remain at the yard. Yes, I support that decision. Now, gentlemen, he addressed the others, who had risen from their seats, we are grateful for your visit and the information you've shared. You can be assured that we will keep you updated on any developments in the case, and I hope you will inform us if you learn anything further. You can count on us. Our associates are clearly irritated that we uncovered this fraud before they did, Sir Mortimer remarked after the visitors had left. It seems to strike at their pride. Now, Stanwick, tell me exactly what you're working on. You have access to all the resources you need. I completely agree that we must do everything possible to save that girl's life. Stanwick outlined his plan in detail. Is there anything else you think I should do, sir? He asked. No, I believe you've covered everything well. Continue with your work and keep me posted as soon as you receive any news. But no news came in. With each passing hour, the situation seemed increasingly hopeless, leaving Stanwick even more anxious and disheartened. That night, he barely slept, lying beside the telephone, desperately hoping to hear the call that would summon him to the yard to pursue some promising lead. He had often been disturbed on nights when he longed to stay in bed, but tonight there was no call. The next day at the yard brought only the same disheartening silence. He was restless and irritated during those unbearable hours, until he finally resigned himself to the thought that he might have to give up hope, fearing that the only news he'd receive would be the discovery of the unfortunate girl's body. Then, late that evening, his fatigue and listlessness transformed into an intense energy and excitement. News had finally arrived.